All right, so we are good to go. Okay, there we go. All right. So my name is Kelly Day. I'm an internship program manager for the LSA Opportunity Hub, and I focus mostly on internships within the nonprofits and arts sectors. And then I will let my colleague Matt introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Yetta. I use he, him pronouns. I'm our internship program coordinator here at the Hub for virtual internships.
All right, so before we get started, in case you have not used BlueJeans before or been to a workshop or webinar with this, you all have automatically, your video and microphone has been muted when you joined. So make sure to leave that off just so we don't have any, sounds coming in, distracting from the workshop. Also, there is a chat box feature if you click on the right side of your screen. So that's where you're able to ask us questions throughout. We're going to be pausing at certain points to kind of look through that, answer those questions, but by no means do you need to wait until we ask you to. If you're having questions come up, feel free to put them in there and then we'll respond to them when we are able to.
So I'm going to run through with everyone kind of what we're going to be covering over the course of this 45 minutes to an hour for the webinar. So first off, we're going to talk about what virtual internships are and kind of what are some of the clear benefits of them. What are some things that you should be aware of as they may differ from in-person internships? Then we're going to spend some time talking about pitching a virtual internship to a potential employer. So let's say that you might have had an internship for this summer that was in person, and you're still kind of engaged in conversation with that employer or your contact, and potentially talking with them about ways that you might be able to transition your in-person opportunity into a virtual opportunity. And so this is also something where folks might kind of know somebody or be interested in kind of doing that initial ask. And this is also applicable to that as well. And so we'll talk about kind of what are some things you should be thinking about as you pitch a virtual internship to somebody you may know. Third, we're going to be talking about working with an employer to convert an in-person internship. So let's say that you've already had that conversation. The employer may be interested in having that conversation with you. What are the nuts and bolts of actually how to do that? And so what are some things you should be aware of? What are some hallmarks of virtual internships that you'll really want to talk about and clarify with the employer that you're working with? Number four, we're going to talk about how and where to find virtual internships. And I'm sure that for many of you, this is something that has been on your mind, has been on lots of students' minds about kind of what opportunities are out there now that in-person internships are harder to find or have been canceled. So we'll go through both Hub internships offered through our Hub internship program. We'll also talk about international virtual internships and some other opportunities as well. Lastly, Kelly's going to run through with you tips and best practices for how to prepare for remote work. And so like us, you're most likely at home or wherever you happen to be, kind of on your computer or your iPad. And so thinking about what are some best practices to prepare for kind of being effective and efficient at doing work well wherever you happen to be at home. And so with that, we're going to get started. So like I said, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about kind of what a virtual internship is. And if you have any questions, like Kelly said, please feel free to kind of to post them in the chat feature, and then we'll do our best to answer those questions as we go. So let's run through an overview of what virtual internships kind of generally are key areas. And so let's talk about the first one, which is obviously remote work, okay? Virtual internships in many ways are actually pretty similar to an in-person internship if they're structured well. Obviously, one of the key differences is you're doing it entirely online. Okay, so there's no, kind of walking down the hallway to chat with a supervisor or a colleague in person. All of that happens virtually. Also, a lot of the work is done in different ways as well, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. So, like I said, so it's basically just remote work. You're doing a lot of it online and through different kind of digital platforms. Meetings are also held through digital platforms. So let's talk about projects. Virtual internships do tend to be more project oriented, more project based than you might find in an in-person internship. In an in-person internship scenario, there's going to be potentially more day-to-day administrative tasks. Um, you might be making copies, you might be kind of typing out different memos. It depends on the work you're doing. But also your supervisor is most likely thinking about projects day by day or even kind of week by week. And so what that does is you might have kind of a greater multitude of smaller projects over the course of an in-person internship than you might see in a virtual internship. Virtual internships tend to have um, kind of more significant, larger projects that you work on over the course of a couple weeks or months, depending on how long your internship is. One of the things that we've seen is that this actually tends to have a greater impact both on your ability to kind of gain skills and kind of really learn throughout the course of your internship, and also a greater impact and benefit for the organization itself. I alluded to this just a couple seconds ago, but also let's talk briefly about another hallmark of virtual internships, which is digital communication. So virtual internships, they really do provide a great opportunity to get experience in kind of the nuance of communicating across digital platforms, right? So email, phone, video conferencing, different kind of applications such as Slack or GroupMe even. And so it might not be something that we think about initially, but thinking about the ways in which we present ourselves through those digital platforms as part of kind of the digital identity we present over the course of an internship. Virtual internships really provide an opportunity to kind of hone those skills and to think about the intentionality with which you communicate across email or video conferencing. Let's move on to kind of one of the last big hallmarks, which is obviously flexibility. This may seem kind of pretty straightforward, but work hours are often more flexible. Interns can complete work usually outside of the standard 8 to 5 p.m. American workday, often from whichever locations are most convenient for them. Given kind of the pandemic and COVID-19, that often is from home these days. And so, it's not unusual for folks to complete work outside of that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so it provides a little bit more flexibility if you have childcare considerations, if you have to help take care of a family member, maybe run an errand to the grocery store. And so you can fit those things in throughout your day while also completing the work that you need to do. Okay, let's move on to how are they different? So how are virtual internships different than an on-site internship? Okay, and so we're going to go over these 4 areas. Like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. Perhaps the most significant is there's a greater level of increased accountability with virtual internships, okay? You're doing a lot more of your work independently, okay? And so the onus is really on you to ensure that you're keeping track of your work, you're remaining kind of vigilant and committed to your deadlines. And so really kind of structuring a framework to be accountable is really important. I myself, and I'm sure Kelly has as well, we've all procrastinated on things at times, especially when I was a student, that happened as well. And so we definitely know that things can happen in life, things can pop up where you're completing a project at 11:50 at night and it's due at midnight, right? And so really thinking about ways and best practices for holding yourself accountable to deadlines, not getting things in last minute is really, really important in a virtual internship because the primary person to hold you accountable is you, okay? Let's talk about delayed response times. That's another thing as it relates to virtual internships, okay? And what we mean by delayed response times are, let's say you have a question for a supervisor. You're most likely going to be sending an email for that. Maybe a text or something along that lines, but typically it's an email is what you're going to see most often. And so there's a natural delay that happens there. When you're having that conversation in an in-person setting, it's not unusual to walk down the hallway, knock on a colleague's door, have that conversation in that moment to kind of get the feedback or to answer the question that you have kind of ready to go. And so delayed response time is something to expect. That can be anywhere from the end of a business day all the way till a couple days, depending on kind of the pace of your internship and kind of the schedule of your supervisor and yours. So that's just something to be aware of, that patience can be key in a virtual internship, that you might not be getting that feedback kind of instantaneously. Let's talk about absence of in-person networking opportunities, okay? And so In an in-person internship, you might have, depending on your work environment and the industry that you're working in, you might have more social gatherings. You might have more structured in-person networking opportunities. So your employer may schedule kind of a brown bag lunch session for you to meet folks in your office where you sit down kind of in a conference room, you eat lunch, you have that type of conversation. Um, Also, it's just there's an opportunity when you're in person to have more organic kind of conversations and rapport building that may happen in the context of an in-person internship. That obviously isn't present when you're doing your work remotely, right? And so thinking about ways that you can still engage and have meaningful connections and build rapport is really important. It typically does require a little bit more effort on your part to ensure that you're getting that quality kind of opportunity to network and engage with other colleagues. And we'll talk about ways that you can do that a little bit later, but that's just something to be aware of. Lastly, let's talk briefly about different modes of communication. And so, like I've mentioned before, in a virtual internship, interns are primarily communicating through email, video conferencing, phone calls, apps such as Slack or WebEx or Google Hangout chats. And so that's just something to be aware of that you're going to be relying on those tools much more frequently than you might in an in-person internship. Okay. So now that we talked about those, about kind of what does a virtual internship entail, right? So what were some of the benefits? What are some ways that they differ from in-person internships? We're going to move on pretty quickly here to talking about how would you pitch a virtual internship to a potential employer, okay? And so what we're really going to do is we're going to focus on kind of what are some key things that you need to be aware of, things that you need to think about, rather than providing you a script of how to do that, okay? Just because we're not, you may be talking with a range of different employers and each situation and experience is unique. So we're really going to try to give you kind of core tools to work with. So the first thing before you even make your pitch to your employer, is it feasible? Okay, especially with COVID-19, kind of the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, it's really, really important to consider whether or not the organization, the business, has the capacity to hire interns right now. Okay, virtual internships can be easier to set up than an in-person internship, both from the student side and the employer side, but it's still important to think through what are some of the challenges, what are some of the obstacles that companies may be facing, especially as it relates to the pandemic. So many organizations are now working from home as well. And so thinking through, for example, does my supervisor have childcare responsibilities? Might they be taking care of a family member? What if it's a company like Microsoft, for example, or Google or Amazon? How might these companies be responding to the pandemic, for example? Is there more work? Is there less work involved? And so really thinking about kind of what is your supervisor, what is that organization going through? And so thinking those things through may help you determine whether or not you can make the ask and also how to shape it, okay? Another thing before you make your pitch is really to know what you're asking for, okay? And that may sound kind of silly, but really make sure that you're thinking critically about what do you want to get out of the internship experience, okay? And how could it be structured, right? So I think it's pretty straightforward to say you want an internship experience, right? You want experiential learning. How long? For how many hours a week could you commit? Really thinking about the different aspects of what's involved in an internship. So time commitment, duration, the types of projects you're interested in, communication preferences, all of these different things are really important so that when you have the conversation with the employer and they ask you, okay, so I might be interested, tell me a little bit more about that. That's probably a common phrase that you're going to hear, and you really do need to be prepared to kind of map that out, okay, as to what that next piece means. Lastly on this piece is really empathy and kindness, okay? So at the end of the day, even though you structure a very considerate ask, you kind of lay it out really well, the answer may be no, given a whole variety of considerations that only your employer may be privy to, okay? Even if it's no, please be sure to thank your contact, the person that you're working with, for exploring that option with you, okay? Empathy can really help to lay that groundwork for cultivating that relationship in the future, potentially for a future internship. But at the end of the day, we really just want to stress that it's a good and kind thing to do. especially kind of given all of the stressors that are going on as it relates to the pandemic. So being kind is a good rule to live by, especially as it relates to making the ask. So we're going to move on. Actually, the title should be different there, but really it is. So we're going to move on to kind of what are things that do you need to think about as you craft, okay? As you make that initial ask, really be sure to keep it short and sweet initially, okay? So the initial ask really should be kind of exploratory, okay? And it should really be framed as a way to involve your contact, the employer, in the conversation, okay? And so it should be both exploratory and empathetic to what they're going through, okay? So asking if they would be willing to explore the idea is key, okay? Asking them kind of what are the considerations that they're thinking about are important, and concluding that by highlighting that you've given the logistics of it, what we talked about before, the nuts and bolts of it, some really serious thought is important. But make sure to welcome their insight, okay? And really be sure not to overload them with too much information too soon. That initial ask should be short, it should be very concise, and it really should stress that you would like their feedback on the idea, okay? Hopefully what that does is that opens up the conversation in the future, that you can kind of get into some of those details if they show interest. Second, be sure to frame it as a benefit, okay? Virtual internships, there are plenty of benefits beyond even the ones that we talked about as it relates to virtual internships. And so do your homework. Draw attention to how a virtual internship could benefit their organization. And so, especially in the midst of the pandemic, companies may be looking for interns to fill roles that they might have had in-person internships for over the summer, pitching it as a way that they can still engage interns around some of that work, both to complete work for the organization and make an impact, but also to provide experiential learning opportunities and give back to students. A lot of companies think about both, the ways that they can benefit the organization, but also ways that they can give back to students. And so engaging them in kind of thinking about ways that it can benefit their organization are key. Lastly, an email may be best. And that's a really important one. Having a crafted written message can be really important to help you both refine and edit that pitch as much as possible. And we really do encourage you as you write it, kind of write it initially, kind of go back and make sure and edit and revise it to make sure it's exactly how you want it to be. An email also gives your contact time to assess the idea, gives them some space and grace to thoughtfully respond to you. So these are some things to think about as you kind of make that pitch to an employer. That was a lot of information, and we know it was. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat window, especially now, and we'll do our best to kind of answer them aloud to the group or type them in the chat box. So we'll just wait a couple seconds here to see if there's any interest on that front. I'm not seeing any questions pop up, which is fine. Oh, there is one. Do you have examples of pitches that we could see? That's a really great question. And so, like I said before, and obviously, Kelly, please feel free to chime in as well on this, it really depends on the company, the circumstances and the relationship with the employer. What we would say is if you have a question about making that pitch, please feel free to check in to email Kelly or I, or you can schedule an appointment with one of our hub coaches, and we can work with you to potentially craft a pitch that works exactly for you, okay? But that's a really great question, and I'm sure that's on quite a few students' minds, so thank you for asking that question. Kelly, do you want to answer the next one?
Yeah. Take a look. How would you approach communicating with a company you were in the interview process with and have not heard about changes for the summer? So if you haven't heard from them in a while, I definitely recommend reaching out, understanding that they're still going through changes too, so they might not have any updates to share, but it's definitely fair to reach out and then give them some time to respond to that too.
Another great question. Do you have any recommendations on how to convert more science and biological research internships? That's a great question. Virtual internships, I think, as we think about virtual internships and what industries they may work well with, research opportunities are great for virtual internships. It's a lot of independent opportunity to conduct research, to do some digging, and then to submit those projects back to an employer. It would obviously depend particularly on which employer you're engaging, but I think framing virtual internships as particularly compatible with research, I think is a good start to that process. Kelly, do you have any other, you want to chime in with anything?
Yeah, I think that's fair. So we have two more questions coming in. I think maybe we'll answer those and then move on. And if you have other questions, please add them. We'll be sure to get to them later or as a follow-up to y'all too. So if you're interested in a company but don't, sorry, I lost it, but don't already have a contact there, who's the best person to make contact with? Person who you think would be your supervisor, Michigan alum, etc. Yeah, definitely something we recommend is reaching out to people you may have some affiliation or contact with. So it's often a Michigan alum, an LSA alum as well. So if you're kind of looking into how to do that, we tend to use LinkedIn to be able to identify them. Definitely feel free to email the hub. You can set up an appointment with one of our coaches or internship coordinators, and they're happy to help you identify who that person might be.
A really great question. At what point during the interaction would you ask whether or not the internship would be paid or unpaid, or for credit? That's a great question. And that's certainly something that if an internship provider is kind of engaged in thinking about a virtual internship, that will come up naturally. I would say that that's not something that would happen even initially. I think you really want to be sure that they're interested and engaged in that internship, thinking about a virtual internship with you. I think once you have a verbal commitment for a virtual internship, the next part of that conversation is really to think about how much time per week, for example, and how long does the internship run for, okay? So that might also help you frame how you might ask for a paid internship. But really, you really want to get those details first. So thinking about how many hours per week, how long is it? Also to really think about how large is the company. And so if it's a small startup, is an unpaid internship more likely than a paid internship, for example? Also, Kelly will talk about this later, but the for credit conversation, I think, is probably more simple and straightforward. I think if it's unpaid, if it is unpaid, you would be sure to want to ask them if they're required, whether that be through state law or some other provision that they have to have credit attached to that internship. And we're happy to have that conversation with you. We have courses through LSA, through the hub that can meet that requirement. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Thank you all for your questions. Please feel free to type them in there. If we don't get to them over the course of the webinar, we will be sending up a follow-up email with answers to all of the questions that were in the chat box.
All right, so next we're going to talk a little about working with an employer to convert an in-person internship into a virtual opportunity. So you're kind of in the process working with an employer. How do you sort of approach that and make sure that everything is taken care of so that you're still getting a valuable internship experience out of it and the employer is getting what they were looking for as well. All right, so outlining a structure and clarifying expectations. Just want to kind of make a note back to what Matt mentioned earlier about sort of the empathy process. This is often the first time that a lot of employers are working virtually themselves, as well as thinking about how can they structure a virtual internship. So just kind of, being open to sort of help them through that and also being understanding if they need time to sort of work through some of these steps. So here are a few things that you can think about when you're working with an employer, making sure that the structure is all there, you're aware of the expectations, and the employer has communicated everything with you. So first, really making sure that you are staying on the same page. So sort of a tip in that is to make a checklist between yourself and your employer of what needs to be addressed in this whole transition. So that might be things like what sort of work was originally planned, how could that be transitioned to a remote format, Some of it may not be. And then you may have new things that are coming up as well as you're transitioning into the virtual internship. Adjusting hours and timelines. So again, this can be potentially a more flexible situation, as well as potentially the work that was planned out may change a bit, which could adjust, either the timelines of projects, the amount of hours that you're working in a week, anything like that. So make sure to talk to your employer about that, see what's realistic, and see what works for you as well in terms of all of your commitments that you may be juggling at the same time. And then finally, talking about projects. So some projects are more easily transitioned to remote work than others, of course. But at the same time, some projects that, at one point we thought could only be done in person are actually transitioning to virtual as well. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as you're going throughout that process. For example, I work with a lot of museums, and they may be doing like exhibitions, internships, where you need to kind of work with the actual artifacts in the museum. But a lot of museums now are transitioning into digital exhibitions, so that could be sort of a new way that your work could show up in this sort of environment that we're in. So something to think about as you're talking to your employer through this. You may even want to do some research into different organizations within the same industry who are doing the same sort of work to get an idea of kind of what are some of the other innovative things that people are doing in this environment. All right. And a couple of things to note about when you would be starting this virtual internship if you are able to successfully convert it. Some things to keep in mind are communication preferences. So I'll talk about this a bit more in more depth later, but communication is going to be increasingly important in a virtual environment as you have to be a bit more intentional about it. So making sure to talk with your supervisor up front about how they prefer to connect and through which platforms. So some will prefer that you always send them emails, some just like you to send a quick Slack, which is like a workplace messaging program. Some just want you to give them a call, so make sure that you're on the same page about that. Orientation and onboarding. So ideally, virtual internships will function here in the same way as in person. So you're going to get a sort of formal onboarding process where you learn all about the organization, you learn about the work you're going to be doing, training, etc., as well as get introduced to staff that you would interact with. If the organization you're working with doesn't have a sort of formal onboarding process set up, it's okay to ask for that. So, think about what sorts of training might I need to do my job well? Who are staff I might interact with in my work, and could I be introduced to them? So that's a perfectly fine thing to ask for, some training in order to do your work well. And then constructive feedback as well. So this is, as many of you have probably experienced, a really useful thing for your professional development is to get an idea of both what you're doing well and what you could improve in order to move on to the next steps of your career. So in a virtual environment, thinking about how this might look without an in-person connection. So making sure that you're connecting with your supervisor frequently, if they're not just kind of offering you feedback, making sure that's something that you're asking for. So I'm sure that they're happy to give it if they have enough notice and are able to kind of prepare something for you. Also thinking about, if there are surveys that your workplace uses for feedback, peer-based feedback, any of those different ways to get that really important professional development piece. All right, and then mentorship. So thinking about mentors in different ways. This might be your supervisor, it might be someone else you've identified at your workplace who's either working in something that you're interested in or who shares certain characteristics with you that you really want to connect with. So when you're thinking about using your supervisor or building a sort of mentorship relationship with your supervisor, ask if you can sort of build this into any weekly check-ins that you're going to have with them. to get to know each other. And this is a place where you can share professional goals that you have so that they're able to kind of understand where you want to go as much as you know. And it may just be, I'm trying to explore this field and see if it's something I'm interested in. But really, be able to see your supervisor as a mentor and if there are others in the organization as well. And then networking, as kind of Matt touched on a little bit before, it's a little bit more difficult to network with people in your workplace and your colleagues when you're not just bumping into people in the hallways, walking to meetings, that sort of thing. So again, this is a sort of more intentional thing to do in a virtual internship. Um, so it could be, you're scheduling informational interviews with those you want to talk with that you wouldn't naturally, or that even that you would in a meeting. Looking out for things like brown bag sessions, anywhere where several people from the workplace are going to be gathering. So that could even be, sometimes they're hosting virtual social events and things like that. All right, so we're gonna pause again for questions, see if we can answer a few before we move on to where to find virtual opportunities if you have not already.
There was a question about would you recommend using Handshake to search for virtual internships, or is a different website better? Just a heads up on that front for everyone. We're actually, I think, talking about that in the next section. So hopefully that question gets answered there. We also had a question, what is the best response to an employer that says virtual internships are not feasible? I think that's a great question. So we'll answer that one as we potentially wait for questions from this section. Um, I think, like we said earlier, kindness and empathy, thanking them for exploring the opportunity with them is always key. And I think if you want to maintain that connection in some form or fashion, if you know them, if they're a Michigan alum, for example, thanking them, asking them how they're doing, saying that, I hope that you and your family are safe and well during these times. And hopefully when this pandemic is over, it would be great to connect with you to potentially explore opportunities in the future, or just to maintain this connection, which I think is really wonderful. And I think keeping it concise and very considerate is key in that sense. But I think that's smart that it could be a no. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So if questions do come up, please feel free to type them in the box. We'll answer them at our next pause point or throughout kind of the course as we go. But I think we'll move on to the next section. So this is really, like Kelly and I have been talking about, it's kind of how and where to find them is key for a lot of folks. And so we'll talk through Hub Virtual Internships job boards and kind of what's out there, as well as other third-party providers that may also be working kind of in international virtual internships. So I'll start off with talking about Hub Virtual Internships. You can find these in the Opportunity Network. And you can access the Opportunity Network using the login in the upper right-hand corner of the Hub's website. And so also another thing is we'll be sure to include the link in this Google Slides presentation as well. But you can find it just by going to the LSA Opportunity Hub website. It's up in the corner. You'll log in that way. And you can search for them. Their Hub Internship Program Virtual is the way to search for them. And we actually are still offering those positions even now. So let me talk a little bit about kind of what's involved with them. And so we really frame them as quality virtual internships with programming. And so one of the great benefits of the Hub internship program, of which virtual internships are a part, is that we spend quite a bit of time vetting and ensuring that these internships meet a higher standard than what you might expect. We ensure that you're getting regular feedback from your employer. There'll be regular check-ins with Hub staff. We ensure that we really engage the employer around thinking about mentorship and networking opportunities, even in virtual internship. And so you'll also receive application feedback prior to submission for a virtual internship through us. which is really great. So before that application goes off to the employer, it goes to somebody like Kelly or I. We review that application, and if we think you can make it even stronger than it already is, we'll connect with you and schedule an appointment to make that happen. Generally, our hub virtual internships are at least 6 weeks long for at least 10 hours per week. This has been adjusted a little bit to more closely align with the LSA internship scholarship requirements. And so you may see hub virtual internships that are starting at 4 weeks long rather than 6 weeks. But generally, they're at least 6 weeks long and at least 10 hours per week. Hub virtual internships can also be up to 35 hours a week, 40 hours a week, or they can just be the minimum. It really depends on what the employer is looking for. In terms of programming, you'll also have access to exclusive resources and professional development opportunities that are hosted and provided by your hub internship program coordinators like Kelly and I. Lastly, and this is just a pitch, opportunities are still available. So we're still posting them in the Opportunity Network as of right now. Generally, we have positions currently in the network for students interested in everything from social media and marketing to research and writing. We have a couple chatbot engineering analyst internship positions, workshop development, website design, business and finance, and event coordination. And we're hoping to continue adding to those as the weeks go forward, but there are positions still in our network that are available to students.
All right, so those are the internships that we have through the Opportunity Hub. Of course, there are many, many internships out there. Lots of virtual are still hiring for this summer. So we wanted to provide you sort of some of the websites that you can look into for those. And I want to make a note that these are sort of broad, so they're not based on industry necessarily. If you are interested in looking into a certain industry, that's also something that you can email the Opportunity Hub about. We have internship partners like Matt and myself who are really well versed in certain industries and may have more resources to share there as well. So many of these you may have heard of, some maybe not, but really if you just search on sort of the big job boards, there's LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor is just a few examples. Searching virtual or remote and kind of whatever sort of internship you're looking for, so whatever field that might be. Handshake is for college students, and so the University of Michigan uses this as well. This is the platform that the Career Center uses too. Many of you may have seen it already, and there are lots of internships being posted there all the time, most of which are remote now, just kind of based on the sort of situation that we're living in. So those are all really good places to look. And then on the right side, there are a few that are specific to virtual, at least right now. So Chegg Internships and Way Up, those are also, they're broad-based, but they have a whole web page that's dedicated to virtual internships as well. Remote students, so that's, of course, remote internships along with mentorship and jobs. You can sign up through there to get an email as well that'll send you internships as they come up that you might be interested in. Parker Dewey is another one that's kind of gaining popularity now, and those are micro internships, which are basically project-based and very short-term. Many of them are virtual or, perhaps the majority now, and all of them are paid as well. And then lastly, just to kind of throw another idea in there, there's a project-based virtual volunteering site that's called Catch a Fire. There are several different volunteer sites, but this is something to consider as well for the summer if you're able to. A lot of these volunteer opportunities they're very project-based, and also you're gaining skills that you would gain in an internship and being able to contribute in that way as well. So it might be, marketing or working on a website or making, advocacy calls, things like that. So you're also gaining a lot of skills through those too. Let's go to the next slide. So I also wanted to make a note of some international virtual internships. I know a lot of students were, hoping to go abroad this summer, whether that was through study abroad or an internship. Of course, virtual international internship is not the same as, an in-person experience you'd get there, but there's still a really important way to gain a lot of those cross-cultural skills and the experience that you would get through an internship as well. Thinking about, different communication styles across cultures, different work styles. So you're still going to get a lot of that understanding and experience, even though it's in a virtual setting. So these are all placement companies that either we have worked with at the hub, or some of our colleagues across campus have given good reviews about. So I wanted to make a note of those. We're also going to send out at the end resources that has a list of all international, placement companies or internships that the university knows of. So you can kind of look through there. Of course, make sure to do your research, chat with one of us if you want to know more about, if we have any knowledge on those companies too, but these are the ones that we do know pretty well. So SageCore, they're focused on international startups, and I know you do an interview with them before you're able to kind of go into the internship that they place you into. IES is one that we work with as well, and they're currently transitioning to offering remote international internships. Global experiences, again, virtual internships, and they make the promise that they're guaranteed within the career field that you're interested in. And then CRCC Asia is one that we have worked with in the past as well, focused on some Asian countries, and then also the UK, it looks like they just added. So a note on these that they are placement companies, which means that they do charge a fee. The fee has been reduced, I think in almost all of them because of the virtual circumstance, but that's something to consider as well if you're looking into it. Some of them do have scholarships through the actual company, and LSA internship scholarship is available that we'll talk about later, so you can submit the fee to be covered by that, but just some ideas there. All right. So we wanted to just take a few minutes. We'll probably just do 3 minutes for this because we're coming close to the end. Just to take some time, as questions will come up after you leave here, and we wanted to give you a chance to sort of start working through some of these things that you would do after you leave the workshop, before we get to the next step, which is going to be how to sort of prepare yourself for remote work. So we won't spend too long doing this, but just wanted to give you a couple minutes to sort of start to look through the resources, and then we'll come back in together. So if you've already identified or secured an internship and you're working to transition it into virtual, take some time, start drafting that ask. Think about the questions that you're going to want to ask your employer. If you're still looking for internships, look through some of the resources that we mentioned or others identify a few that you'd like to apply for. And then as you're going through that, write any questions either from this or anything that we've already covered, or that you're wondering about in the chat box, and we'll be answering those as we go throughout. So I just want to give about 3 minutes for that. So we'll come back at 3:52 to move on to the next part, but we're going to be answering questions too.
Also, for those who are with us, just to know that if you can to stay till the end, we'll also be talking about some really helpful resources that we've linked to, including a resource guide for students around virtual internships and a couple other things. So if you're able to stay, I encourage you to do so because we'll be talking about those resources at the end as well. I typed a couple answers to 2 questions we had. One I think was a great one around how to navigate the Opportunity Network, the site. If you're looking for hub virtual internships in particular, you can go to the Opportunity Network, search under opportunities, and when it brings you to that page, under the filter, there's a filter that says position type. And if you click Hub Internship Program Virtual, it will take you to the positions. Now it only shows 6 positions there, but for many of those, there's multiple internships being offered under each one. And so, for example, the virtual investment intern, I believe that's 2 to 3 positions in there, not just 1. So be sure to look through those if that's what you're looking for. And then you can also search the Opportunity Network more broadly.
There's a question, given the flexibility of everything being remote, would it be possible to balance taking a summer class while doing a remote internship? Or what would you advise I look for when searching for the expectations of internships, given that summer classes will last around a month? Yeah, I mean, I think that really depends on your specific situation. You know, what are you looking to get out of a course? Is it something that you need to take this summer? And also thinking about the internship, whether you know you have one or you're looking into them. Thinking about how many hours do you think is reasonable to be able to work the internship, plus how many are you spending on class? Um, and also, I think just you know giving yourself a little bit of grace and more time, you know, in this sort of a situation too. So really, you know, don't feel too much pressure to kind of overload yourself with things. But if it's feasible for you and you're interested in doing both, yeah, I think that's something you could definitely pursue. But again,
We do,
depends on. Mhm.
yeah, we do offer virtual internships year round through the Hub internship program. So virtual internships are offered fall semester, winter semesters. We have some that run all the way through fall and winter. And then we also offer summer internships. And so quite frequently we do have students who take a virtual internship opportunity in the fall or the winter, also taking classes. Typically, obviously, those are usually in person. Um, but I agree with Kelly. If it's an internship that's 10 to 15 hours a week, that might be more possible to balance with coursework versus potentially a 30 or 35-hour a week virtual internship commitment.
Mhm.
Well, I think that was 3 minutes. And so we're going to move on to the next section before we hit the resource section, which is tips and best practices on how to prepare for remote work opportunities.
Mhm. All right. So, first things first, just to sort of think about the space where you're actually going to be working. So, you may think, you know, working from home seems potentially for you, depending on where you're at, like an ideal situation. You can kind of, you know, go to the kitchen for snacks, come back, do some work. But it really does take a lot of intentional planning in order to set it up for a space where you can be productive and feel at your best, and then also be able to kind of transition back into non-working time too. Um, so creating a dedicated workspace, if at all possible, you know, it depends on where you're living, what your living situation is, a space that you dedicate to your work time. So whether that's just a desk somewhere in your house or apartment, a kitchen table, quiet room. Not only does that help you concentrate on work when you're doing work, but it also gives you a sort of boundary to say, okay, now I'm moving away from this space. I'm done with work and kind of being able to, you know, turn off work for the day. A note about personal boundaries too. Just wanted to kind of mention this. Living with others can potentially be challenging. You know, whether it's family, roommates, children, especially if either you have caregiving responsibilities or just others need things from you from time to time. So it's important here to kind of communicate with both the people that you're living with when you need to work, if possible, and kind of work out a schedule where, you know, if they need something from you, you can be stopping work at that point, um, and going to tend to the person that you're living with. I think employers tend to be a bit more understanding of this now and a bit more able to let you have a flexible schedule. So, you know, as much as you're comfortable, kind of sharing what your needs are with your employer too, and seeing what they're able to do. And then a couple just sort of logistical things. Dressing for the office, even if you're at home, really helps you get into the work mood and also projecting that professional image that you would if you were in an office otherwise. And then just a quick note to check your background. It's not something you might think about initially, but you know, until maybe you're on a video call, but what kind of person you see that's behind you, making sure that that's free of distractions. You know, it could just be a wall, something that's going to be simple. Okay. And then managing your time, not just the space. So kind of related to, you know, the sort of flexibility that might be possible with a remote internship. setting a schedule. So, even if your employer is okay with it, working in chunks of time throughout the day and having chunks of time for breaks, that helps you sort of get through it a little bit as well. And then a couple points about sort of managing projects and your time with those. Um, Thinking about creating a daily work plan. So maybe you're just kind of blocking blocks of time on your calendar. So, from 10 to 11, I want to work on research. The hour after that, responding to emails, things like that. That helps you sort of create a daily plan, get through the goals that you wanted to for that day, and then focus on one project at a time. There are also tools that you can use to manage projects along with your employer, things like Trello you may have heard of. So that helps them see where your progress is at, and then helps you also organize large projects into manageable steps. And then finally with this, just make sure to take breaks and disconnect. It can be easy to kind of just work through, but really taking that time, depending on what's okay with your employer over lunch or other times, just to get completely away from work, take a walk, go call a friend, things like that, helps you come back refreshed. Okay, and then finally, just a few notes on communicating effectively. Again, it takes more intention when you're working in a virtual space, but really setting a schedule, especially with your supervisor. We say ideally you would, have a meeting with them once a week. Video calls, if possible, is great to build rapport and build relationships with your supervisor or others. If that's something that you're uncomfortable with, or maybe your Wi-Fi isn't the best, that's something to communicate to. Um, Also, different tools. We mentioned this earlier, but familiarize yourself with what tools your workplace uses to communicate, and how people on your team prefer to be communicated with. Getting to know your colleagues, so going back to that sort of networking piece, checking in, looking for different opportunities when a lot of people are, building relationships with each other, social things, brown bags, anything like that is something to kind of maybe put a bit more effort into when you're working in a virtual setting. And then in written communication, of course, becomes even more important. You could write something and mean one thing, and then someone reads it and understands something else. So really kind of noticing, one, the sort of formality that your employer, supervisor, others in your office uses in their communication and reflecting that in your own. And then also thinking about how your words might come off. So maybe trying to make things a bit more positive than you normally would, just so you can kind of inflect that, what would normally come across in your tone of voice or facial expressions, things of that nature.
So let's talk briefly about what resources we have available. And so these are all links that will be available in the Google Slides to click on. The first is the Hub Virtual Internship Resource Guide for students. Really what it does is it lays out a lot of actually what we talked about today. It's just something that you can also take with you in a PDF format. The International Center has a really helpful list of virtual internship opportunities in organizations that host virtual internships abroad. And so that's a list that you may be interested in. And so that's a Google spreadsheet. There's also the LSA Internship Scholarship. And I think this is a really important point that, and hopefully you have gotten an email on this already or several communications on it. This summer, virtual internships are eligible for LSA Internship Scholarship funding of up to $5,000. So the LSA Internship Scholarship at this point actually isn't available for in-person internships this summer, only for virtual internship opportunities. And so if you have questions about that, we're happy to answer those in more depth. Kelly can really take the lead on those. Or you can visit the LSA Scholarships website for more information. There's also a coaching tool available for students around exploring opportunities. And so that's a PDF document you can take to kind of map out what you may have been thinking about. And then lastly, just real quick, if you would like to attach credit to a virtual internship, the Opportunity Hub offers a one credit course called ALA 225 that really can be beneficial if you're interested in kind of having that opportunity to reflect and learn in the context of a course along with your internship. So it is 4 o'clock. Thank you for kind of sticking it out with us. We're happy to stick around for a little bit and answer any additional questions you may have.
Where can we find the slides for today's presentation? Yep, we'll be following up with an email with all of that information too, so you'll get those links.
Yeah, we'll be sending the links to the slide deck, and then also we're hoping to have, because this is recorded, we're hoping to have this up on our website potentially as well for students to view. So please feel free, once you get the link, to pass it on to other students who may not have been able to make it to the webinar today. Any additional questions? It's okay if you don't. If you're ready to go, feel free to sign off.
So, thank you all for joining.